Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining. We're going to start in just a minute. We're going to give people time to continue to join, so just hold tight with us and we will get started very soon. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Amber Crossan and I'm the Communications and Content Manager for Heart and Alliance's Research and Policy Division. I'm going to be starting us off today just by welcoming everybody and walking us through some logistics as we get started. So again, thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about Never Fully Free, the latest report from Heart and Alliance's Social Impact Research Center, and we have an amazing panel here today to share some of the findings from the report, experiences, and really bring, a face and a story and even some data behind what permanent punishments are and what it looks like. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. We are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to send your questions throughout the entire webinar as it's going on. I'll be moderating the chat box and the Q&A box for your questions, and at the end, posing them to our panelists to answer. We will also have a recording of this webinar made available, as well as the slides on our website. And, please feel free to join us in this conversation on social media as well. Our Twitter account is @ImpactHeartland, and you can use the hashtag #NeverFullyFree to stay engaged with us and to continue this conversation during the webinar and afterwards. And again, all of the information that you're going to hear and see in the webinar can be found in our full report at heartandalliance.org/neverfullyfree. So I'm going to hand it over to Katie Buchego, our Director of Research at Heartland Alliance.
Thanks, Amber. Quentin's actually going to kick us off.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to hand it off to Quentin, who is our campaign manager at Heartland Alliance.
Thank you so much. That was a double handoff. No problem. I'll take an assist from either one of you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today to talk about this very important report that we wrote in our Research and Policy Division. And the name of the report is Never Fully Free, the Scale and Impact of Permanent Punishments. The idea of permanent punishments may be a little bit foreign to you all in terms of language, but we're very intentional about using that language because permanent punishments are what most people have talked about as or known as collateral consequences. And we made a very specific language choice for several reasons that I'll share with you that will shape the context for the rest of what you'll hear on this webinar. Permanent punishments, we use that language for one because it is a more accurate representation of what people with records experience. These legal penalties that create long-lasting, often permanent barriers to both employment, housing, education, civic engagement, all of these things, right, after a person leaves the material structure of the prison, after a person acquires a criminal record at some point, even an arrest record that did not lead to a conviction, these things hover over people's heads for oftentimes the rest of their lives. I know individuals that are 20 years removed from any justice system involvement, but right now in the present, still cannot access resources and contribute in ways that contribute to human flourishing. So we, with this Never Fully Free report, want to really outline that for people. And we really want you to understand that this is something that is a permanent punishment. Oftentimes, I call it the prison after the prison. Secondly, we use the language of permanent punishments because the term collateral implies that there was no intentionality behind the laws. There's a very intentional aspect to the laws that we put on the books. Underlying all of these permanent punishment laws is a cultural understanding of what it means to be a person with a criminal record. And oftentimes that is a threat, oftentimes that is scary, oftentimes that is dangerous, basically mischaracterizing and quite frankly dehumanizing a whole group of people. As you will learn in this webinar, you will learn how many people are impacted by this. 3.3 million people potentially in the state of Illinois are living under the weight of permanent punishment laws. And lastly, in Illinois alone, this is a national problem, but in Illinois alone, there are almost 1,200 unique sanctions that bar people from critical resources. So again, we implore you to use this language so that we can confront the realities of the problem, and language helps us get there. So when we talk about opening up opportunity and removing barriers, just remember that there are millions of people under the weight of these things, and they are often punished permanently.
Thank you, Quentin. I appreciate that background and the importance of language when we talk about these issues. as Quentin said, we've been hearing through our work with people with criminal backgrounds that they continue to be punished long after they serve their sentence. And we knew we needed to know more. We needed to know the scale and scope of this problem. And part of that is understanding who was impacted by it, how many people. We didn't have a strong number of that. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Katie Buitrago. I'm the research director here at Heartland, and I'm the lead author of this report. And I'm super excited to share the findings with you today. So we looked at data on criminal history from the state of Illinois, and we found that 3.3 million adults alive today have been arrested or convicted of a crime in Illinois since 1979. And we picked that year because it's commonly accepted as the beginning of mass incarceration. And we also wanted to look, far back, even at criminal histories that are decades old, because that continues to impact people's lives today, unfortunately. And these millions of people are living with permanent punishments every day. Over 1/3 of adults with records have a conviction record, and 1 in 5 adults with records have a felony conviction record. And the most restrictive, farthest reaching permanent punishments are targeted at people with conviction records, especially felony convictions. You'll see that 1 in 5 adults with records were arrested but not convicted of a crime. Even though they weren't convicted, your arrest record can appear on some background checks or online searches, and that carries with it a stigma that can make it harder to get jobs or housing. And finally, you'll notice this big box taking up almost half of the square. That's the 44% of people with records where we have no data on whether they were convicted or not. So we know they were arrested, but we don't know if that arrest resulted in a conviction or whether it was dismissed. So our estimates above of the number of people with convictions are likely conservative, since some of these unknown people may have been convicted of their crime and it might have been a felony too. And one thing I'll note about the data is that it tells us who was arrested or convicted in Illinois. We don't know if they were living in Illinois at the time they were arrested or convicted, or if they still live there today. So this is just a rough estimate of the impact, but it's a huge number of people. We have 9.9 million adults who live in Illinois currently. So we also had people on our team who did legal research into the types of permanent punishment laws that exist. As we noted, there's nearly 1,200 permanent punishment laws that restrict access to basic human rights like employment and housing. And so first we'll talk about the types of permanent punishments that prevent or hinder access to employment. The vast majority of permanent punishment laws are related to employment, 982 of them. And 169 of these require or create background checks. And while the intent behind these laws might be to increase public safety, research shows that they actually have the opposite effect. Employment instability is a predictor of recidivism, which means that people who struggle to find good quality jobs after they finish their sentence are more likely to commit another offense. And research also shows that employers disproportionately discriminate against people of color with records. Job applicants with criminal records in general are much less likely to hear back from employers than applicants without records. But the penalty of having a criminal record is even higher for Black job seekers than for white job seekers. White applicants with criminal records receive more callbacks from employers than all Black applicants, even those without criminal records. So there's serious racial discrimination in employment that's happening on top of the discrimination based on criminal history. And as part of this report, we knew we needed to center the voices of people with criminal backgrounds. We interviewed them and featured their stories throughout, and they also informed our research design, the questions we asked and how we asked them. And several people who contributed to the writing of this report have criminal backgrounds. And you'll see the voices of people with records throughout this presentation. In regards to employment, we heard them describe encountering employment barriers from background checks and stigma and years out of the labor market while they were incarcerated, as well as restrictions on their activity during probation, parole, or house arrest that made it hard to find and keep a job. Another deep type of permanent punishment is related to housing. And while there are 40 laws, a much smaller number than the employment-related laws, these laws can still have deep and far reaches. These laws limit the geographical location where a person can live. They can make people ineligible for housing in shelters, veterans' homes, and nursing homes. They can even deny someone's inheritance through a transfer of property. And several of these sanctions allow landlords to conduct criminal history background checks. Surveys of people with records show that nearly 80% of respondents have been denied housing because of their record. And this happens even with minor offenses or offenses that are years old. And federal laws restrict people with certain types of criminal records, most notably drug offenses, from living in public or subsidized housing. And given the disproportionate impact of criminal records on people of color, the housing-related permanent punishments contribute to patterns of housing instability, segregation, and homelessness that are racialized. And the combination of housing and employment permanent punishments keep many people with records in poverty and put them at risk of homelessness. At the same time, the experience of homelessness is criminalized in many places, and so that puts them at risk of criminal legal system involvement. Basic acts of survival for people experiencing homelessness, such as sleeping in public or public urination, are criminal offenses. There's little evidence, much like with the employment-related permanent punishments, that supports the assumption that housing restrictions protect the well-being of other residents. And third, we looked at the types of permanent punishments that relate to education. In Illinois, there are 28 laws that govern education access. And these laws enact permanent punishments by creating restrictions for grants and educational and job training opportunities. And they also, people with records face barriers to federal financial aid. These laws authorize background checks for admissions to training programs, colleges, master's and PhD programs, medical schools, and law schools. And this creates a chilling effect on the people who have criminal histories to apply to these educational programs. We also found that there are 364 state laws and regulations that restrict occupational licensing for people with a criminal record. We heard several stories of people with records who went through a long educational program, spending a year and a half, 2 years, learning a field, learning an occupation. And when they went to get, a license so they could actually do their occupation professionally, they were denied because they had a felony conviction. And so it really lessens the impact of an educational experience if you can't actually do the job that you're trained for. All of these conspire to contribute to worse educational outcomes for people with criminal histories. Compared to the general public, formerly incarcerated people are nearly twice as likely to have no high school diploma, and more than half formerly incarcerated people hold only a high school diploma or GED. Less than 4% of formerly incarcerated people have a college degree, compared to 29% of the US population. And next, I'm going to pass it off to Anthony Chestnut to talk about his experience trying to find jobs and housing living with a criminal record. Anthony, if you could unmute yourself. Anthony, if you're trying to talk, we still can't hear you. I think you have to unmute yourself on your end. So we're actually, I think we're just going to keep moving and see if we can return to Anthony when his technology's sorted out. So I'll keep sharing some more data, and we do have another story coming up. So we found when we looked at the data on criminal histories that there are substantial racial disparities in the composition of people who've been arrested or convicted of crimes in Illinois. Black people make up 14% of the Illinois adult population. Hello?
Yes, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No worries. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, I was what was the question? I know what y'all was talking about, but y'all, did you want me to share like my experience or what I was going through? Because okay. First and foremost, I would just like to say I appreciate everybody that's on this call right now, because this affects a lot of us, and it affects me personally. I just did 22 and a half years. Like, I was incarcerated from the age of 16, and I came home when I was 39 years old. It's like a lot of stuff I didn't know that would affect me coming home. Education, first and foremost, trying to find a job. You know, if you send someone to, I'm not gonna say send someone to prison. I committed a crime, I paid my debt to society. But I went to prison when I was 16, and I came home at 39. No tools to transition back into society. Like, everything has transpired, but for me, trying to get a driver's license, employment, just trying to get a job. I was home 5 months, and every place, Safe and Found, I called all these places, and nobody would give me help until I went to Ready. But I did 16 months. First and foremost, I can't get on a Section 8 list because I have a felon. Me coming home, trying to transition back into society, not having nobody. I have a great support system, but the people that don't have that, like, I feel like that's people like me, that's who need things like that. But over the course of my incarceration, I took several classes. I was in cosmetology for 16 months. When it was time, I completed the class, got my certificate and everything. But when it was time for me to get my license, they told me I had to pay $350 just to take the state test. If I passed the test, it was up to the prison review board to decide if I can obtain my license or not. After completing 16 months, paying my money and passing the test, like that's just one of the barriers. This murder registry. Once I complete my time and sentence, they telling me I still have to be in the murder registry database, violence against youth database, for 7 more years. I did 22 and a half years. I completed my 3 years of parole, but I still have to pay to be in this database and be on this system. How is that justice? I can't even get a license. Like, it's a housing. If I want to go move somewhere, they have to do background checks. Okay, I understand that because people want to be aware of who they're living around. I understand that, but why should that be a hindrance because I have a background? This stuff is still fun. I can't even get a passport. There's certain places on earth that I can't go because I have a background. Because I made a mistake when I was 16 years old, like y'all, that I'm paying for the rest of my life. But I didn't want to take up too much time. That's just some of the things that I had to deal with.
Thank you so much, Anthony. We really appreciate you sharing your story with us.
Well,
and if anyone has questions for Anthony, we'll have time at the end as well.
I'm trying to mute it. Do anybody have questions?
I think we're going to come to them at the end of the webinar, Anthony. So thank you.
Was that because I just, okay, all right.
And I can mute you from here in case you're having trouble finding it. All right. So just returning back to this data on racism and permanent punishments. Like I was saying, we found substantial racial disparities in who has a criminal record in Illinois. Black people make up 14% of the Illinois adult population, but 29% of people arrested or convicted of crimes, 35% of those who are convicted of crimes, and 45% of those who are convicted of felonies in Illinois. And Black people are also disproportionately likely to be convicted of crimes that carry heavy permanent punishments, such as drug crimes and violent offenses. And I just want to note that the data we'll be talking about on racial disparities have to do with Black people and white people in Illinois. Like I said, we looked back to 1979 to look at a broad scope of criminal records. However, the data on Latino ethnic identity was not collected until 2015, so it wouldn't be comparing apples to apples to report on the Latino numbers. And there's significant research that shows that Latinos are heavily impacted by the criminal legal system, as well as Indigenous and Native people, and we also don't have data on that ethnic background. And we also found that when Black and Brown people finish their criminal legal system involvement, they're doubly stigmatized because of their race and their criminal backgrounds, as I mentioned during the employment section. An estimated 14% of Black adults in Illinois were currently or formerly incarcerated as of 2010, compared to 3% of adults overall. And Illinois has the third largest percentage of Black adults who are currently or formerly incarcerated in the nation. The people of color with records who we interviewed described the criminal legal system as a system full of injustices with laws in place to control them rather than protect its residents. And I'm going to hand it over to Colette to talk about her experience.
Okay, I am unmuted now. Thank you, Katie. So my name is Colette Payne, and thank you, Heart and Alliance, for putting out this data and this much needed report. So I did my first prison sentence at the age of 14. And I grew up with both of my parents, went to Catholic school, had my siblings and I, all of us went to Catholic school. I have 2 sisters and 3 brothers. So we were sort of like the Brady Bunch. My father was a dance choreographer, owning his own studio, teaching acrobatics, tap, Afro-Cuban jazz, and ballet. And as a kid, my siblings and I grew up partaking in some of those activities. Every Saturday, we would go downtown to the studio and take our lessons. I participated in piano lessons. My brothers did drum activities. However, as my father got older and his health started to decline, so did his business. When I was born, he was 62 and my mom was 28. So we grew up in a gated community, South Commons, south side of Chicago. And once his business started to decline, we found ourselves homeless. And, you know, that devastated me and my siblings. And it was very traumatizing. And what I've realized is that people handle traumatic experiences differently. So we moved into the Salvation Army, and then after being there for maybe like 4 or 5 months, they end up finding us a place, which was in the projects, Ida B. Wells housing complex. And my grandma stayed there, so it wasn't an unfamiliar place to me, because I would go there to visit all the time, with my auntie staying in the backyard, cousins, you know, it was a community. However, things start getting a little shaky, and I started to realize that we were actually poor. And we stayed in a community where it was concentrated poverty. And after doing that first prison sentence, I ended up cycling in and out of the system. And I remember my mom saying to the judge, what can be done to help save my child? And for a person, a woman of color with no money or little money, there was nothing that can be done. And, you know, I think about discipline and punishment. Like, what is the difference between the two? And I could have been disciplined. Maybe I would have had a different trajectory, you know. Discipline means to teach, to show, to guide. As a child, I should have been guided in a way that would have helped me understand why these things were happening to me. And punishment means to punish is to inflict suffering for past behavior. And I most definitely suffered throughout my life, because I was taken away from my family at a young age. So cycling in and out of that system, and my sister being diagnosed at a young age, that kept me in the street. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and her behavior was sometimes unpredictable. And I would just stay in the street. So now I'm trying to survive. And I did my last prison sentence 2009 and came home into 2012. And the punishment, man, it looked like no other. I couldn't find a job. I came back to the same community with little to no resources, didn't receive resources upon leaving the juvenile system, and then cycling back in and out of the adult system. There were resources, but they were limited, depending on, I guess, how many felonies I had in my background or what those felonies were. So I had gotten several offers for jobs, even went through the criminal background checks, urinalysis tests, aced those, and they just told me they couldn't hire me, although they knew I had felony convictions, but I was told the amount of felony convictions that I had. So I guess that was their way of safety and protecting their establishment. Housing, housing was scarce. I got my housing, in which I'm still in this place now, through Heartland Alliance, and I'm totally grateful for that. But I can say this: the program is a 2-year program. What if I hadn't gotten a job that I have now and wouldn't have been able to pay my rent after those 2 years? I would have been homeless again. So, you know, I usually say that we need to rethink the way we think about safety. We need to rethink the way we think about discipline versus punishment, because my story isn't unique. It's others that have similar stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colette. And, you know, this is, again, we've heard 2 stories today from Colette and Anthony, and there's 3.3 million people in the state who might have similar stories as well. And I think, Colette, your story really drives home that these permanent punishments don't only hurt the people who are directly involved with the system, it hurts all of us. It hurts, you know, the employers who wanted to hire you, but they couldn't because of the rules about your felony convictions. So there's lots of ripple effects to people's children, to employers, to their family and friends. And so it's really important that we do something about this. Yeah, just to provide some more context to the stories that Colette was telling, you know, the vast majority of people involved with the criminal legal system identify as male. However, there's still a significant number of women who are impacted by the criminal legal system and by permanent punishments. The fastest growing prison population is women identified. And again, when you look at the combination of race and gender, the racial disparities and gender disparities are stark. Black men are 13% of all adult men in Illinois, but 27% of all men arrested or convicted in Illinois. So it's a rate that's twice as high. However, that disparity is even starker for Black women than for Black men. Black women make up about 15% of all adult women in Illinois, but 34% of all women arrested or convicted of a crime in Illinois. And research shows that women often end up involved with the criminal legal system for different reasons than men, such as surviving poverty and substance use. And permanent punishments might therefore have a uniquely gendered impact on women. And they might need, you know, special supports afterwards. Of all people convicted of property crimes in Illinois, 24% were women, which is the highest proportion of women represented among all crime types in our report. And of those women convicted of property crimes, 40% were Black. And women are more likely than men to be primary caregivers for children. When women with criminal legal system involvement face barriers to self-sufficiency because of permanent punishments, that also means barriers to caring for their families, and that can feed into the cycle of poverty across generations. And criminal issues with people with criminal histories are often talked about as an urban problem, but I just want to show this map that shows the rate of people arrested or convicted of a crime in Illinois from 1979 to mid-2019, and just show that it's an issue throughout our state. Even though the highest numbers of people are in Cook County, where Chicago is, there are still high percentages of people who have criminal histories throughout the state of Illinois. And so if you think you're outside of Chicago and you think that it's not a problem in your backyard, I I'd recommend that you look at the data. And we have an interactive map on our website at heartlandalliance.org/neverfullyfree. Click on the section about poverty and criminal records, and you can look at this interactive map and see your community and see how side by side the rate of people with arrests or convictions compares to poverty rate and other socioeconomic indicators. Finally, I'm going to pass it off to Quentin to talk about what we need to do about permanent punishments.
All right, yes. So what do we do? It's clear there on the slide. Get rid of them, right? Get rid of them, dismantle them. It's I don't want to simplify because I know it won't be an easy task, but yeah, get rid of them. The way that I like to think about it, because of the recent events in this country regarding the police and race and calls to abolish the police, abolish prisons, and I think that my goal in leading this campaign and our goal as a coalition around this campaign is to abolish the prison after the prison, right? We need to get rid of these laws that are quite frankly just really old and archaic. What I didn't mention earlier was that these laws are very much rooted in a concept that comes from medieval Europe, I believe, called civil death. It's where when people were convicted of crimes, they were in effect just cut off from every level of society. And at its most extreme, people were allowed to be hurt, to be even killed in some instances with impunity. And if you think that's an extreme example, I think what we do to people with records is very similar to that. You might as well sentence somebody to death if they can't eat, if they can't find a place to live, if they can't do anything to better themselves educationally. So that's the one thing. And if you want to get involved with the campaign that we'll be going with to get rid of these, you can email me at qwilliams@heartlandalliance.com, .org. But this is the other piece of this too. It's not just removing laws, right? It's not just a policy change. There is a cultural aspect of this as well. I think I alluded to this earlier, is that the reason why these permanent punishment laws exist in the first place is that there is this cultural understanding, underpinning about what it means to be a person with a record. So I'm not only looking at this campaign as something that is going to change laws on the books, which that is my sincere hope and desire for people to experience full freedom, but this is also about anti-Black racism. This is also about the intersectionality of oppression of certain groups of people. You just saw the data, right? You cannot ignore the fact that this is a race issue as well, and how we treat Black and brown bodies and how we criminalize Black and brown bodies is something that is central and core to this campaign. So not only are we looking to change the laws, we're also looking to change the culture and change the narrative around what it means to be a person with a record. So how do you do that? Number one, use different language. Language is important. We use permanent punishment because it accurately describes what's happening to a person, but then using people first language, calling people people rather than ex-cons or offenders or threats or dangers, so on and so forth. When we also talk about criminal justice reform or dismantling systems, we also need to stop making the distinction between certain kinds of people with records and other kinds of people with records. So this person has a so-called violent offense. This person is a non-violent drug offender. No, we have to look at it in its totality, and we need to question also the punishment frame, is what I call. How do we have accountability without punishment? Because punishment is fundamentally in this country rooted in systemic oppression and racism. So the punishment that people use to justify treating people a certain way cannot be anymore. And we need to start rethinking this, particularly from the lens of restorative and transformative justice, right? If you don't know what those things are, please look into those things. And lastly, I'll say, if you are a resident of the state of Illinois and you have elected officials that are supposed to be representing you, they're supposed to be representing the people, right? You need to know who those people are. Who is your state rep? Who is your state senator? Who is your congressman or congresswoman? And then let them know that this is very important to you, because as Colette so eloquently pointed out, you want public safety. Everybody wants safety. Everybody wants to feel safe. But if we continue, there are almost 1,200 laws that restrict people from things that contribute to their well-being. And if we continue to do that, we are in effect undermining public safety. I will just say straightforward, we will never achieve the safety that we want to achieve until we get rid of this. We will never get the safety that we want to achieve until we start treating people like humans. And we will never get the safety that we want to achieve until we stop trying to distance ourselves from those people who did those things and coming into a shared humanity, one where we all make mistakes, one where none of us is perfect, one where we're all capable of causing harm, and one where we're all responsible for repairing that harm when we do cause it. So those are the things that we can do.
Thank you so much for that powerful message, Quentin. And now is the time the audience has the floor. We are opening it up for questions. Please submit your questions in the chat box, like Amber mentioned. And Amber, if we already have questions, please let us know.
Yeah, we do have some questions. So first, I'll just start by sharing that we have a ton of messages just for Colette and Anthony, just thanking you both for sharing your experience and just for putting yourselves out here like this, and just so many people saying thank you. So just wanted to share that with you all. And so then this first question is for Colette. So Colette, what helped you most to be able to get a job? Were you looking for employers that openly say that they hire people with records?
Yeah, so when I came home, this last time, I worked at several different places. I worked at a thrift store, Unique. I hated that job. I always felt like things were crawling on me, so I quit. And I started working at Growing Home, which is a farm in the hood. And for those of you who don't know, it's right on 57th and Wood. And that job helped me connect. I'm just something with the earth helped me connect with my inner self. I started volunteering with CLAIM, at the time was Chicago Legal Advocacy for Incarcerated Mothers, and just telling my story. I sought out a job at the airport working at the Hyatt Regency, and I participated in a program at Roosevelt University. So they did know that I had a background. However, the employer said because how many felonies I had and the type of felonies that they were and the position that I was applying for, they couldn't hire me to protect themselves. And I got that, and I took full responsibility of my actions, or and I was just like, I just want a job. I don't want to go back to jail or prison. And she said, okay, we're gonna work with you and do the best we can. Let's see if we can place you somewhere else. And this went on for a week. So mind you, I'm going to taking off my shoes. Like it was just like a long ride on the blue line from where I live. And I have food experience, and they didn't even want me there. So I'm like, okay. So, I enrolled in school, and I was like, and just volunteered telling my story. I had to, put it in my mind that, and know in my heart that I am worthy and I'm not going back, no matter what society says, and no matter how they try to socially exclude me. So I enrolled in school. And right now I'm continuing to further my education to get my degree. I hope that answered whoever's question it was. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Colette. So I think this next question I'm going to pose to Katie. So what made your team want to study permanent punishments?
Yeah, I think it was really rooted in all the stories that we were hearing from people like Colette and Anthony about their difficulty accessing what are truly basic human rights. If you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there's a right to employment and a right to housing and a right to an education. And so when we have these permanent punishments that restrict people with criminal histories from accessing these for their whole lives, it's a lifelong restriction on your human rights. And this was really a partnership between our research team and our policy and national teams. And we knew that they would be working on this campaign to try to remove permanent punishments. So we really wanted to provide the foundational information to understand what is the scope and scale of this problem, who's impacted, and in what ways are they impacted. And again, provide central stories of people with lived expertise in order to, data and numbers can tell you is part of the story, but I think in terms of changing narratives, hearing people's experiences is really crucial. Quentin, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, for sure. I think that one of the big reasons is, because criminal justice reform here recently has really gotten a lot of attention in a couple of key areas, because when we talk about the criminal legal system, we have these different areas of it. It is a big behemoth of monster, right? So you have people that are working stuff on the front end, like bail reform and pre-trial sentencing, so on and so forth. Then you have all people also looking at the conditions on the inside of the prison. And I think that became even more illuminated with COVID-19. And now things that we have already known, those of us who have been incarcerated, we already knew that prisons were unsanitary. We already knew it wasn't clean, but now the spotlight has been on that even more, and people pay attention to that. And then, but less in sentencing reform, all of those things are important. But I think there's been less attention given to what needs to happen on the back end, outside of a framework of like offloading all of that responsibility onto programs, because that's what happened. And I love programs and we need programs, and without programs, quite frankly, there would be nothing. So thank you to all the people who run programs. Thank you to all the people who do that, and all the people on the front line, those direct service providers that deal with this struggle just as much as we do, because they're trying to help. But here's the deal. When we send people out of our programs, whether they're 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, whatever it is, what kind of world are we sending them out to? And the truth of the matter is, the world that we're sending them out to is a world where there are 1,200 laws that prevent them from accessing certain things. So we need to do both. We need to focus on those other elements of the criminal legal system. We need to do quality reentry programming, but we also need to do the policy and legislative work on the back end to really do reentry. And really, again, this notion of freedom, this is not hyperbole. People do not feel free. So in order to help people achieve that true freedom, we have to remove these permanent punishment laws. So that's why we wanted to dig in, and that's why we wanted to really go deep with this, because this is a problem that's pervasive in Illinois, but it's also a problem that's pervasive throughout the country.
Thank you so much for that, Q. And coincidentally, I'm going to pose this next question to you as well, and something that you've just brought up fits into this question. Somebody asked, are the criminal legal system and the criminal justice system the same thing? So yeah, I guess maybe you just share a bit of why we use one terminology kind of over the other, especially in this report.
Yeah, I think they're the same thing in terms of what we're referring to. But I think people remove the word justice sometimes because of what I have mentioned with language. But it is a paradigm shift. So I say criminal justice sometimes, and then when I catch it, I say criminal legal system, right? Because the criminal legal system just describes really what it is. It describes the apparatus. There is legality that is then adjudicated in courts, so on and so forth. But the reason why people remove the justice from it, because a lot of us feel like and know that in many instances that there is no justice, right? So how can we refer to something as a criminal justice system when there is no justice? So it is just a matter of language choice, and all of us are working hard to really incorporate truthful, what I'd like to think of, just truthful language about what we're facing, because I think until we really sort of talk very plainly and very forthrightly about what we are actually facing, then, you know, when we do that, we'll have a better opportunity of making a change that we want to see.
Great, thank you. And this next question is for Anthony. Anthony, if you can hear us, let me know. I'm gonna ask this question to you. So what do you think it will take for society to look past someone's record? Oh, Anthony, can you hear me? Give it a minute. Well, we'll come back to Anthony, because I actually think now seeing that question, I'd also love to ask that same question. Oh, Anthony, you there? Can you hear me? Well, I'll pose the same question to Anthony if we're able to get connected with him. But Colette, I'll ask you question. What do you think it will take for society to see past someone's criminal record?
You know, I believe that folks, whoever it is, like employers, housing providers, you know, sit down with that person, get to know them. You know, people are more than the crime or, you know, the act that they've been charged with. We are human beings. Regardless of how folks want to look at it, at the end of the day, you need a job, you need housing in order to survive. Like when we think about safety, how is that if and I'm just keeping it truthful, if I didn't have a job and I needed to provide for myself and my family, what would that look like? It can look like a lot of things. It can look like a lot of things. Because I have to live. And that may be living to some folks, you know, but, you know, in giving a job, offering a job, make it meaningful, you know, look, I don't know, it's people just have to have some type of compassion in their hearts and not socially exclude folks in that way. Yeah. And just put themselves in someone else's shoes.
Yeah, I think people need to, again, what I said earlier about distancing themselves from those people or the problem over there. And I understand why human beings do that, because those are parts of ourselves as humans that we don't want to take a look at, right? Just as Colette just said, like, she's like, well, what would you do if you couldn't find a job? What would you do if you couldn't? And until you've been in that position, like, you can't really answer that. But I think we can speculate because we're all humans and we understand what it's like, most of us, what it's like to be in dire straits in any kind of situation. And what would you do at that point? We're talking about survival here at that point. And all humans have that survival instinct in them. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's the thing that has kept us alive. The reason why we're all here today is because our ancestors had survival instincts, and even more so for Black folks, right? So we've all survived and we'll figure out how to survive. But I think, you know, what will it take to get people to look at us different? I think we just need to keep beating the drum that we're not any different than anybody else. Like, we're just human, right? We're just human. That's it. It's that simple. I may have done something, but again, I like to always say, especially when it comes to the violent, non-violent dichotomy, is that a person can commit a harmful act, but that doesn't mean that they're a harmful person, right? In essence, right? You can do You can steal something, but that doesn't make you a thief. You can do drugs or something, but that doesn't make you a drug addict. In your essence, you're a human being, and we're all capable of doing a wide range of activities and behaviors. And I think the more that we dig into that and believe that truth, I think we'll be better off.
Yeah, thank you. I think
I just want to know, Anthony messaged that he asked us to unmute him, but it says you've muted yourself, Anthony, so I think you have to do it on your end. But feel free to speak up if you manage to get it done, and we can return to you.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think I'll have another question. So I'll pose this one to Kate, or I guess I'll pose it to Katie, but if anybody else has anything to add, please do add to this. Somebody asked, has there been any research on how other countries handle these same social challenges that we have? And is there a track record of them doing better, or is it about the same as ours?
Yeah, there's tons of research on this. The US is pretty much an outlier in all of the worst ways when it comes to public safety. We have one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. If you look at other industrialized countries, our incarceration rate is 6 times as high, which is crazy. Like, these are other countries with same levels of resources as we have. And they're just choosing to invest them in different ways. They're investing in the well-being and opportunities of their residents rather than paying to, thousands of dollars a year to lock them up. And many of them have lower crime rates, lower violence rates than we have. So there's a big body of research out there showing that the US is pretty much on its own in terms of incarceration rates as well as poor public safety.
Great, thank you. Anybody else from the group have anything to add? Okay, let's do a couple more questions, hopefully. Oh, I think, Anthony, I see a green mic. Are you connected? Can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, awesome. I'm so glad we were able to get you reconnected. So, Anthony, I'm going to ask you.
I was connected. I just didn't know how to unmute myself. That's all. I heard the whole conversation. I wanted to answer the question, and for me, I would say interaction, because people commit crimes and go to prison for different reasons, but at the end of the day, we all human beings. Like, during the 2 years that I've been home, like the people that I've met and the things that I have done, when I talk to people, when they're around me, the way I interact and deal with people, they would never know that I have been incarcerated as long as I've been until I tell them that. So I think it's a misconception. People hear, oh, well, you was locked up for a murder, you killed somebody, or you did some type of crime. We judge people off of that, not off of how they live or what they're doing now. And I feel like that's fair. I just think people need to interact with people who have record or ex-offender. Like, I feel like if the community and people we would interact with, they would interact with us more. A lot of those restrictions and the way people feel about ex-offenders, a lot of that stuff will be broken. I just feel like people need to interact and get to know someone versus just judging them based off of a crime you committed or what someone told you. That's it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much. That's absolutely true and a fantastic answer. Okay, so I think we have time for a couple more questions. So Kate, this one is related specifically to data that is drawn out in the report. So let me see if I can. So it says, I saw in the report that, quote, 75% of criminal history background checks in Illinois are for educational access to degrees or programs in the public health field. So can you explain how this fits into the context of statutes that you found where such a small percent relate to education versus a vast amount relating to employment? Does that mean that only 25% of background checks are processed for employment applications, housing applications, etc.?
Yeah, I'm not muted. Okay. Yeah, I can see how that's a little confusing. So I think what it is that 75% of the education-related background checks are related to public health. So that doesn't include in that denominator all of the employment and housing-related background checks. Does that sound right to you, Quentin? Do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I think that's the answer. You got it.
Cool.
Great, thank you. And so then I think we'll pose this last question is, can you talk about how the landscape looks like in terms of permanent punishment laws nationally? Is this a problem that's unique to Illinois? How do other states compare when it comes to permanent punishments?
I can tackle that one, Katie, if it's okay. Just a quick, simple answer. There's a way that you can find out too. It's on the National Collateral Consequence Inventory. You could just Google that and just see a state-by-state thing. We did a little bit of a deeper analysis because you have to like really check that data because things update on policy all the time. But the short answer is that there's 48,000 of these laws across the country. Illinois is among the worst, but every state in this country has way too many of these laws. So, I see a question in here too. I want to answer it.
Go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so there's somebody in here, I'll read it. It says, I hear that, but keeping it honest, some have become quite dangerous in their attempt to survive. They are taking and hurting people regularly. Though some do change, some don't. How do we know for sure while we're trying to stay safe? And whoever wrote that question, man, thank you so much for that question, because that's the real question, right? And that's the question that we have to grapple with. And this is the question that we must contend with. So I love that question, and I love the honesty, because honesty is going to actually take us where we need to go. And I'll let Colette and Anthony jump in here, but I'll just kick us off and say how I usually answer those questions, because those of us who have been incarcerated, those of us who have done crimes, and those of us who haven't done crimes that have been connected to the system when they haven't done anything, right? But those who actually have caused harm, right? Like that happens. People get hurt, right? People get hurt, and we know that. So there's a couple of things that I would say to that. Number one is that there's an assumption in the question that assumes that there is a lot of difference between victims and said perpetrators, because what we're finding that there's not, that oftentimes victims and perpetrators are the same people. That means there's a cycle of victimization and there's a cycle of violence, number one. But the bigger question is, the bigger point I want to make here is that ask yourself the question, and I get this question all the time, ask yourself the question, is what we've done up until this point, right now, to 2020, stopped any of that from happening? What we've done so far, we can at least admit that. Now the path forward needs to be co-created with community members, with directly impacted people, with folks that need to be accountable, and also folks need to develop practices of repairing harm. But what we've done up until this point, here's what we've done. We've said, when you do something, we're gonna lock you away, and we're gonna lock you away for a long time. We've done penalty enhancements. We've done sentencing enhancements. We've done lockdowns. We've done sweeps of whole neighborhoods. We have done it all when it comes to punishment. And yet, we still don't feel any safer at all. We have barred people from access to resources and institutions, and we are still no safer. So I respect that question, and it's a wonderful question, because we all want to be safe. The issue is that we have only been given one framework by which to achieve that safety. And the framework has been one that has not worked. And quite frankly, it has not worked for all people, right? There are communities where there's a certain semblance of safety, right? And that is for a reason and a lot of other factors that would take a whole other webinar to talk about. But the thing that I would say is that yes, people are hurt, and yes, people are hurting people. Of course, people are hurting people. They're human. Humans hurt people. But what we've done up until this point to try to achieve safety has not worked. So we need to be open to the possibility that there is another possibility and that there's something else that we can imagine that is more equitable and provides more safety.
Yeah, I want to speak to that as well. I mean, I look at it, that question as being threefold. So before, I look at before, during, and after. So before that person went to prison, I'm gonna say I went to prison. I'm gonna use I statements. What does safety look like in my community? What does safety look like for my family? When I entered into the system, how did that safety look then? Was prison a place of rehabilitation for me? How was I treated? What guidance was I given to guide me along the way once I returned to my community? And if a person has an out date, you have to realize that they're home, they have an out date for a reason. People get life without the possibility of parole, right? That means they possibly will never come home, which is sad. But if folks are coming home, how are we embracing them as a community? How are we making sure that they thrive instead of just survival? How are we adding to that? So I get safety, but if folks are coming home, you have to understand that they are coming to a community near you. And what does that look like? Do we provide them an opportunity to have a job where they can take care of themselves or their families? Do we provide them with housing, or do we just leave them to figure it out on their own? What does safety look like in our communities? What does it look like?
I wanted to respond to that also. That's a very great question. I I am still in the process of getting acclimated to being home. Like it's a lot of things that I had anxiety and went through therapy about, because literally I was like a child coming home. Everything was new to me. I just wanted to speak to before I went to, because I'm a piggyback off Miss Colette, the way she just presented her stuff. Before I went to prison, I was very ignorant, arrogant, and pompous. Like I was a street dude. I didn't care about safety. Like I caused destruction in my neighborhood and other neighborhoods. And God seen something in me where he set me down for 22 and a half years. So this is why I love to be a part of things like this, because I didn't feel safe coming home. I was scared going out. I was scared to go out the house, everything. I didn't feel safe. And for 22 years, all I thought about was getting free, making all these plans. But coming home, I never experienced anxiety in prison. I experienced it here. So all of that was like, I didn't, just think about that for a second. After doing 22 years, 22 and a half years in prison, I didn't feel safe in the world because I had been gone too long. But that's why I do the things that I'm doing now, because I played a part in the destruction of my community. So I have to play a part in rebuilding my community, being a positive example in my community. That's all I want to share.
Well, thank you all. Katie, was there anything that you wanted to say to close us out?
Just again, I want to thank everyone who joined us here today and shared their stories and gave us such powerful testimony. And if you want to learn more about the report and see videos from even more people who are sharing their stories and look at the interactive map, go to heartlandalliance.org/neverfullyfree. And we'll also share it back out when we email attendees. But thanks for everyone for sticking with us to the end, and for everyone who shared today.
Yeah. Thank you all.
I want to thank y'all for doing this. You know, for putting the spotlight on this, like, because this is an issue that affects a lot of people. So thank y'all.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
All right. Bye, y'all.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.